record on this computer. Okay, hi Chula.
Hi Sam. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you as well. Thanks for joining me. We had such an interesting conversation over the last couple of months about different topics that I've been posting on social media about mental health and well-being that I thought we'd give it a whirl again.
Cool.
Yeah. So this month we've been looking at the window of tolerance.
Yeah.
And for the purposes of easy explanation, I've printed out the posts and put them in. I've stuck them on this bit of card. It's all gone a bit Blue Peter, so forgive my production values.
Oh, great! I love the diagrams. I love the theme.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously, well, not obviously, the middle section here, the grounded section, would be the ideal place for us all to be. And what occurred to me this month was that the year of lockdown is going to trigger most people to jump out of this window of tolerance, either up here into the high, feeling high or hyper aroused state, or into the low hypo aroused state here.
Yes.
So one of the characteristics of, well, let's start with grounded first. Being in our grounded selves is characterized by being open, curious and creative.
Yeah.
Able to deal with life as it comes.
Yeah.
Can think and feel at the same time.
That's very interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Think and feel. Can learn and solve problems easily.
Right.
So when I'm in my best self, let's say, I'm able to do shit like that. Although I must admit, thinking and feeling at the same time did like you did make me. I did think, oh.
Yeah. Do I actually do that or not? Yeah.
Ever. But yeah. But so if we were to look at being hyper aroused, so to feel high out of our window of tolerance and pushed up, the characteristics would be anxious, angry, rapid heartbeat, constantly feeling on, losing your shit over nothing, and overuse of alcohol.
Oh, right. Okay.
So one of the questions, in fact, I'll go back to that question in a minute, but in fact, let me ask it to you now. Sure. I wanted to ask you about the difference of overuse of alcohol and alcoholism.
Oh, I see.
In fact, let's look at that now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long answer to that question, and I'm not sure of how to really put it succinctly enough for it to be a short answer. I would say that in a nutshell, you get people who are addicts stroke alcoholics and people who are non-addicts stroke alcoholics, and that latter group can become, through overuse of alcohol or drugs, addicted. But fundamentally underneath it, they're not, you wouldn't consider them addicts or alcoholics. Whereas the addict or alcoholic, conversely, could also really be regimented around their alcohol intake. And you wouldn't even necessarily say they were perhaps overusing alcohol, but they are an alcoholic. And that's defined in one way by the way in which it facilitates their emotional process. So I would say, so there's a spectrum there. And I would say that overuse is what you get a lot of people who you would consider non-addicts who aren't really alcoholics going into overuse, and that can create dependency, but you wouldn't necessarily term them an alcoholic. Whereas I would say that alcoholics in active alcoholism would have become much worse when they come out of their window of tolerance either way. But you're talking about the hyperarousal, and I think that's because alcohol is a depressant. So when people are getting hyperaroused, they're using the alcohol maybe consciously to chill out or relax, but actually what they're doing is they're depressing the overstimulated central nervous system. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and it never ceases to amaze me actually what alcoholism is about. So it's less about it's less about the alcohol and more about the ism.
Yeah,
in a way.
And the person. It's more about the person.
Yeah. So the ism is the dis-ease.
Yeah.
and that alcohol is a way of managing the dis-ease, as opposed to somebody who perhaps might be over drinking, using alcohol more during lockdown at the sort of 5-6 o'clock phase in the day, where they're trying to bring themselves down from this hyper aroused state.
Exactly. Yeah.
Particularly when things like gyms, social engagements, but being able to go out for, I don't know, see your mates, or to just go out and be with other people, and having a whole smorgasbord of availability of things to do. We're not able to do any of that. So the quick fix to any self-regulation at the moment is a glass of wine, isn't it? Or a beer.
Exactly. And I would say that with the hyper aroused state, something like exercise or socializing with friends, whilst that might be a stimulating experience and it may stimulate the central nervous system, actually, I think it would have an ultimately positive effect on a hyper aroused person. Do you see what I mean?
I do. It's almost like a discharging of energy.
Yeah, exactly.
So it makes me think of when animals have been in, I don't know, a deer escapes from, I was going to say a crocodile, that so wouldn't happen, that's ridiculous, a lion, and they're sort of, running away over the savannah, and then they do a shakedown, don't they, afterwards? And that is that's almost like our sort of going to the gym or going for a run or going out with our mates and having a real fucking massive belly laugh. It's discharging, isn't it? That tension and energy in the body.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's when we get high in our hyper aroused state, but obviously we can also drop down into the hypo aroused state there.
And
that's characterized by feeling tired all the time, apathetic, low mood, poor digestion, and zoned out, spacey and numb.
I could definitely relate to that one more, actually.
Me too, funnily enough.
Yeah. I think when I'm actually working and engaged with work, I can go into the hyper aroused state. But as soon as I stop and I have a break, even if it's 10 minutes, I can plunge into that hypo aroused state of feeling really tired. I mean, at the moment, what's happening to me is whenever I sit down to watch television or just sit down to relax, I fall asleep within seconds. And I thought, oh, I'm just exhausted, but I think it's actually to do with being in that hypo aroused state.
I would completely agree with that. I mean, I don't think I've ever spent so much time in that low mood, physical, hyper aroused state as I have done in lockdown. It's been shocking to me about how my day literally has to stop at about 3 o'clock. I can't go much further than that. Otherwise, my eyes, they're literally closing, and there's nothing I can do about it. It's bizarre. Okay, so one of the ways we were, so that's high, that's low, that's where we'd ideally like to be.
Yes.
So what I was looking at is how to get us back into that window of tolerance state. And these are the factors that came up again and again and again that resonated with me, really.
You may have to read those out for me. I can't quite see them.
Yeah, so it's regular physical activity, which we actually touched upon just now, didn't we? Mindfulness, meditation, social connectivity, laughter and levity, music, listening to music or playing music, and counselling. And I suppose there's 2 questions from that which I'd like to ask you. Number 1 is how will counselling, as one of those suggestions, help bring us back into our window of tolerance?
Oh, well, I think it's about the difference in counselling or the therapeutic relationship between a client and a clinician or a therapist. It's the difference between that type of discussion or conversation or space to what we normally get from friends, family, partner, all the normal relationships, maybe even colleagues that we have, what you find is that the other person is bringing their personal agenda to the conversation, both, intellectually, from a perspective or stroke opinion point of view, and then also energetically. And I think because we're all in this pandemic together, whenever we have conversations with people on a normal person-to-person level, there's all this stuff that's, coming with the other person. So you could ask yourself, if we're all dealing with this situation, all dealing with issues, how can that person truly be there for you? Or how can one person truly be there for another when they're both so in need? And I think in the therapeutic relationship, and when I work as a therapist with my client, I'm not bringing my stuff in. Yes, it might affect me, if I've had a bad day or having a bad day, I may not be as joyous in my responses, or I may not be as on it perhaps as I might usually be. But at the same time, I'm not bringing in my opinions. I'm not bringing in my my feelings and my thoughts about what's going on at the moment. I'm very focused on that person and their internal reference. So in terms of their use of the space and their engagement with the counselling itself, they're getting something that they won't get from any other person. And not only that, but I'm obviously bringing all my training, all the theoretical knowledge, all the experience I've had of working with people, of working with trauma and abuse, and all the difficult things that can come into the picture in counselling. That's informing the way in which I respond. And if you look at long-term work, my knowledge of somebody in terms of their past, their historic sort of issues, their trauma, their transgenerational issues, their patterns of relating, all those different things that they're bringing to the counselling inform my responses to every single thing that they say. So the counselling situation is so unique. I don't think you can really replicate it in any other way.
And the experience of your client or clients in this counselling relationship would be that they are deeply seen, deeply heard,
yes,
and understood, a felt sense of okayness about them, no matter what they bring. And and what we're imagining, or what we find is, well, certainly my personal experience of being a client is that it does bring me into my window of tolerance, just by reframing my idea of myself and my idea of where I fit in the world.
Yeah. And it's really interesting looking at it from this perspective, and this model of the window of tolerance, because I can relate it to the way in which some of my clients come to a session and they are in that hyper aroused state, and they're very agitated and anxious and on it, as it says, and much of the session is about bringing them down and then grounding them and getting them to a calmer place, perhaps have a more objective perspective on the things that have been stressing them out or worrying them. And then also some of them are coming from that very hyper aroused state. And as soon as you start the session, you can see that they're perhaps depressed or low, struggling with things. And so some of the session will then naturally be focused on, okay, so what's positive? What's going on? How can you energize yourself? Are there any of those things like exercise or good nutrition not happening for you, and how could you make positive changes? And sometimes it even becomes more goal orientated, and I'm asking people, okay, so what could you do over the next week to kind of give yourself a bit more energy and a more positive take on life? So without even realizing, I think I've been working with that hyper and hypo difference, but I've just never named it in such a way.
There's so many theories and ways of working out there, isn't there? It's always interesting when you bump up against a new one, or one that you haven't contemplated before. But I really like the window of tolerance. I really like that way of looking at things. My third question, and I'm going to add a fourth one, actually. So my third question is, if you are an artist manager and you are dealing with clients, artists who are either hyper or hypo. They're either high or they're low. What would you advise them to do, or suggest, or help them in some way?
Well, I guess it's about assessing someone's mental health and well-being, kind of using, there's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I know the audience may not. And it talks about, it's in a triangle, and it's the way in which we, the things that we need to give us that sense of self, really. And it starts with the basics. So I think looking at, is someone eating well? Is someone sleeping well? Are they exercising enough? Those are the sort of foundations of good health. And if those things are missing for the artist, then there needs to be some concerted effort to bring that in, or at least bring it into balance. And then after that, you're kind of looking at, well, how much is the work contributing to a hyper-aroused state or a hypo-aroused state? Where are they on that spectrum? Do they need to come down a bit? Are you giving them too much work? Are you pushing and pushing and pushing and demanding to the point where that person is in such a hyper-aroused state all the time that they're verging on burnout? Or are they understimulated, or perhaps not having their emotional needs met, and therefore in this hypo-aroused state, and sinking into depression? So it's about being able to place the artist on that spectrum and do what's needed to get them closer to that window of tolerance, or get them into the window of tolerance.
So having an idea about what the window of tolerance is, what the characteristics of hyperarousal, what the characteristics of hypoarousal will really be a good thing to know for managers.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And not just for the artist, but for themselves too.
No, absolutely. So my final question here, it says music.
Yeah.
Which is such a beautiful thing, that is a way of bringing ourselves into our window of tolerance.
Yeah.
I don't know why I say, well, because I've worked in music all my life, I guess, pretty much. So, and you being a musician, and it really resonated with me that it can take us to a different, listening to putting our headphones on, listening to an album that we love can take us, can literally change our nervous system.
Yeah.
Affect it to the point where it can bring us down from being high, or bring us up from feeling low. And I just wonder what songs, albums, artists do that for you?
Well, in terms of relaxing, it's often classical music. So I'm very much into a chap called James Rhodes. He's a pianist, and he wrote an amazing autobiography called Instrumental, I believe it's called. And it's, his story is amazing, and he's an incredibly talented pianist. And I love listening to him. And he's got a recording called Live in Brighton, where he's speaking in between the performances, and he's talking about the composers and about their sort of idiosyncrasies, and almost some of their trauma and how it impacted on them as individuals. It's really fascinating. And he's got a lovely voice, and that just always brings me down from that hyper-aroused state. And there's also an album called Black Pudding by Mark Lanigan and Duke Garwood, and it's just his voice and two guitars, and it's kind of bluesy and slow, but very, very relaxing. And always a bit of Nick Cave helps. And then to get out of the hypo aroused state, it's I have a few guilty pleasures. I was listening to Def Leppard's Hysteria in the car, which always kind of takes me back to my youth and sort of brings me up, even though it's like, the cheesiest thing you could possibly listen to. But just anything with energy, a bit of Beastie Boys and stuff with, good rhythm and good upbeat kind of energy always brings me out of that hypo state. A lot of positivity. The new Faithless album is amazing, and there's a lot of really nice tracks that I think actually there's certain musics music, like that album, for example, the new Faithless album, where it could do both. It can relax me if I'm too high, and it can bring me up if I'm too low. So it never fails to work.
That's the Faithless album, you say?
Yeah, the new one. How about you?
Well, Faithless have been, knocking around long enough to know what a hypo and a hyper aroused state is. I think we all know what I mean by that. Let's say not Jackie Wilson. Yeah, it's Jackie Wilson. Land of a Thousand Dances is my go-to, my guilty for up. And I'm so embarrassed to say, Hairspray, You Can't Stop the Beat.
Yeah.
Fucking hell, I love that song. Honestly, if there's something, because there are some songs that, I mean, musical songs. I love musicals. They are literally penned with intrinsic in their DNA is to hit all the buttons, isn't it?
Yeah. And to lift.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, relaxing music. I guess, I'm a big Prince fan, a big Radiohead fan. Lifting up Manic Street Preachers, I find the Manic Street Preachers can bring me to tears sometimes, and then you add on that nostalgia for the 90s and what was going on for me, in the thick of active addiction and absolutely no fucking idea whether what was up and what was down, and but see, even talking about music, actually,
I mean, my brain's going already. I was thinking about, have you ever heard the Easy Star All Stars album Radio Dread?
No.
Which is it's a reggae and dub version of OK Computer, and it is amazing. I mean, it's note for note perfect. I mean, the musicianship is astounding, but it's a beautifully done album. Really beautifully done album. Yeah, if you like Radiohead, then check it out. You'll love it.
Yeah. Lovely. Oh, lovely. Oh, Chula, that's the end. We've come to the end now, but that was so brilliant speaking to you once again.
Yeah, and you really enjoyed it.
Yeah, amazing. And maybe we'll do it again next month.
Yeah, love to.
Brilliant. Okay.
All right.
See ya.
Take care. Bye. Cool.
Stop this and let me bring it back, because also I want a fag.
Oh, okay, no worries.
Hang on.
You can ring me back on the phone.
I'll ring you back on the phone.